Welcome to another episode of Living with FASD, an educational and human interest show for those living with the effects of prenatal exposure to alcohol, their family and loved ones, and anyone else wanting to learn about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. Brought to you by someone with both professional and living experience with FASD. I am your host, your FASD coach, Patty Casper, and I am so excited this week to bring to you Melissa Jacobus, who is the author of The Accomplice. You want to hold that up, Melissa?
Yes, I will.
So if you have not read this, people, buy it, read it, and pass it along because it is a gem. So I'm so excited. Melissa, can you please share, introduce yourself and share a little bit about what led you to write that? And I see the cover of it hanging on your wall.
Yes.
That is just stunning.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Patty, for having me here. I refer to myself as an advocate. I'm not an author. I'm just an advocate who knew that writing a book would enable more people to understand the story. I wanted to mention that in the book, in the back of the book, there are resources that people can go to for assistance for their children, relatives, friends. So there's resources in the back of the book.
I did the same thing in Sip by Sip.
Yeah. The book took 6 years to write it because I was living through continued challenges of FASD, a parent that experiences, family that experiences FASD. So I was living through it while I was writing about the past. Mm-hmm. So, and I knew it had to be published because it would bring greater awareness. And the more I advocate for my children, and others impacted by FASD, the more I surround myself with people like you and others in the field that I learn from. So it's a matter of getting the information out there. And it really wasn't therapeutic to write it. I really felt like it was faith in action. It was a call to action. Yeah. I had written since 2013 a proclamation for the state of Georgia every year, with the exception of 1 year during the COVID. And I had presented, and as you know, we all do this as volunteer advocacy. Many places in Mississippi and New Orleans, via Billy Edwards, Larry Bird, and many of those experts who had asked me to speak. Again, all volunteer advocacy, as we all do. Right. And I felt like there needed to be more awareness, and hence the book. And one other reason, and really the inspiration for writing the book, were two of my children who I wrote the book about. Were having great challenges, and they wanted the book written. So
that's remarkable to me.
I'm sorry?
That's remarkable to me.
Yeah,
that really speaks to the values that you have instilled in them.
Yeah, as you read the book, you will understand. And when I told them what I was thinking about doing, they said, please do it. Please do it. And they asked me to change their names, which I did. But and only because the internet's very scary and they're connected on the internet. So but they wanted me to write it, and they want help, and they are now in their 30s. Yeah. So so this book is takes you on a path of their life. Yeah.
And they were in their late teens when
it was the late teens, early 20s.
They're in their
late teens.
Those transitional years are so hard for everybody, neurotypical as well as neurodivergent, but they're just so extra challenging for those of us with FASD. As I read through your book, I just was asking myself again and again, where does she get the energy? How can she keep moving?
I prayed.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
I mean,
and that was very evident. I mean, so
it was. I mean, it is prayer for me. And while I was writing the book, my prayer was answered. During the writing of the book, things happened that there's no other explanation except prayer was being answered.
Yeah.
But I do want to mention this. Life would be easier for all those families, all those impacted directly with FASD, if we were acknowledging it correctly with a diagnosis. So, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, when I started this, there was no information. There was little information in the United States. And then I found NOFATS, which is now FASD United, but I got a lot from British Columbia. But just like we're both wearing glasses with a prescription, our kids are getting the wrong prescription. And people are thinking, well, they got the glasses. Well, you're putting the wrong prescription in it, which is making it much harder.
Yeah.
So
all the headaches that come from having a bad prescription.
Right. Absolutely.
That make life tiring and painful. And
right.
Yeah.
So I just
I can tell I need mine adjusted. I keep going like this.
I know. It's just like, oh my gosh, how many?
And it's bad so anyway, when you're using your bifocal for not close up work.
I know. If the awareness was there and they were getting the right, as I call it, the environmental prescription for them to be living a safe, risk-free, protective factors, life would be a heck of a lot different. And they deserve to have that.
I love that analogy. I love that analogy. I'm going to start using that when I give my talks, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, please.
Because it's just perfect.
Yeah.
It's absolutely perfect.
Yeah. I call it, well, the environmental prescription is what I call it.
Yeah.
For protective factors, but and
truly that's what accommodations are. They are adjustments in the environment.
Right.
Because we don't change the child, we don't change the adult.
Right.
We change things in the environment to make it easier for the adult to meet expectations. Yeah. It's all environmental, just like an IEP at school.
Yeah.
It's not an individualized education plan. It's an individualized environmental plan.
Right.
Yeah.
So as soon as we can do that and recognize this correctly, the sooner that their gifts and their strengths will progress the way they should. Yeah. Since their needs will be met, because their needs are not being met. And neither are the caregivers. I mean, it's just not happening. So, and they deserve it. Yeah, they do. And I'm so curious about your comment that writing the book was not therapeutic. Did you not, at the end, did you not experience that wave of relief, or are you saying it's not therapeutic because things are still ongoing? They're ongoing. Okay. And I say it wasn't, I did it with great love and great faith. I did it with a lot of tears. There are parts in that book that were very, very difficult to write, certain chapters, because I had such an emotional attachment to those in the book as I was writing about it. And I'm very candid, and it needed to be very raw, because as adoptive parents and anyone, any parent or caregiver that is trying to bring awareness to something that no one recognizes, we are stigmatized, we are looked down upon. And to be as raw as I needed to be in this book about the experiences of advocating for those who are impacted by FASD, it isn't their problem, it's society's problem for not recognizing this. And so it wasn't therapeutic because it was ongoing. So for every chapter I probably wrote, there probably could be 5 or 6 sub chapters within each chapter of things that were going on that would have been just too complicated to include. There was enough in there to include with to reveal the candidness and rawness of it for people to really understand, without them getting lost in it. Right. And and also it was ongoing. So when that final chapter was finished, there was already challenges coming up that I needed to take care of. The next chapter was waiting for you. Yeah. In fact, when my mother read the manuscript, I said, "What did you think?" And she said, "I want more, because more has happened." And then my mother, sadly, oh my gosh, devastatingly, passed away 3 months later. And I just knew this had to be published because that was the manuscript. So I sat during the COVID at the dining room table I'm on right now and finished writing the book, and with the blessings of my children, to get this book finished. So it was very difficult. It was difficult, but the relief was, I guess the therapeutic part was getting it finished, but it was not actually therapeutic writing it. And I prayed a lot. So to finish writing it.
Well, your book has been on my website's recommended reading list for, the year and a half or so that I've had my website up. And I tell foster and adoptive parents all the time, mandatory reading. You've got to read this, because so many, at least where I live, it's very common practice to tell incoming foster parents, your children, due to the trauma, will probably act half their age. And that's all they're told.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about dysmaturity, but there's not word one about what do you do with that information, right? There's nothing about parent them as if they're that younger age to get them past the hurdle, right? None of that. So they're left with just not a lack of preparation.
Right.
And so many people come into the work of foster care thinking love is enough to fix or cure all these poor wee ones who have had such a hard shake in life so far, who have seen and experienced more than any child should, more than any person should. And my love will be enough. Well, no, it won't. You need to be educated.
Right. Right. Well, if someone needs glasses, you can't say I'm going to love you enough, because even though you got a stigma or a far side or near side, it's going to be enough. No, it's not. You
I love you, so you should be able to see the blackboard.
Yep. Yeah. Shouldn't you?
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
That line is the gift that keeps giving. I mean, it just fits in so many different places.
Yeah. They just have, everyone has gifts and strengths, and if their needs aren't met, they're not going to be able to reach that potential and the happiness and fulfillment that they deserve. And this is why the book is there. And
I think too, I mean, it is a spectrum, right? So some people are able to navigate life better than others, right? With fewer supports, but it doesn't mean that their lives have not been impacted. It doesn't mean that they don't have their struggles that most of the world doesn't see, or that most of the world can't explain away with something else, with, the wrong prescription. But it robs that alcohol exposure and the damage that it does robs everybody, no matter where on the spectrum they fall, of their potential.
Mm-hmm. And Patty, how much are they compensating? To me, they are compensating so greatly to meet the expectation of their chronological age that people think they're supposed to meet. And when you're compensating, you're exhausted. And I see the baseline of much of the FASD, those impacted, as anxiety. So you've got a whole lot of people self-medicating their anxiety, which puts you into the opioids and the alcohol risks. And Dr. Carl Bell, who was the late Dr. Carl Bell, who was a mentor of mine, who I met, and he introduced me to Rosalind Carter in 2016. The Carter Center was one of the first endorsements of the FASD Respect Act, which we'll get to later. But Dr. Carl Bell worked in Chicago, and he wrote an incredible book that he did not promote. And I dedicated his book and Dr. Bell in my book. So I always figured if someone can get to his book from my book, then my book was worth it, because his is absolutely hands down what needs to be read, along with many others that are out there. But the fulfillment and the strengths and the gifts that need to be met, because the needs need to be met of those impacted, is huge. And to me, again, the high anxiety, which is what many of those who are impacted by FASD, it's that level of anxiety, some is high, some is lower. And the adaptive behaviors, it's not an intellect thing. So when you have to adapt from one thing to another, that creates anxiety.
Yeah.
So those two goes kind of hand in hand. So if we could meet those needs, you know, those who are impacted by FASD, I believe, with an understanding of FASD in the medical community and the criminal justice system, we'll be able to take care of this, but it's not being met.
Yeah.
So,
and I think another source of fuel for the anxiety is the very common characteristic of inconsistent performance, right? Having on and off days that can affect not only memory, you know, how to do things, or things that we've learned that are seemingly forgotten the next day, because they are. But I mean, those cycles between on and off are not necessarily day by day. They can be moment by moment.
And stress impacts those cycles. So if we use an environmental prescription and understand what the environment needs to be in relationship to adaptive behaviors, then we can lower the stress and lower the anxiety. And Dr. Bell, he was highly educated on autism and on mental disorders, and then jumped into the FASD. Sadly, he passed away in 2019. And again, his book was never promoted the way it should have been promoted, which he had planned to do. So I placed it in my book. But the anxiety and the adaptive behaviors that those who are impacted by FASD, you know, that they experience, to me and to many of us in the field and parents, are what needs to be addressed.
You know, you said a few minutes ago about how hard this is for parents and caregivers, that you guys, and as parents and caregivers, get stigmatized, and which is very true. You know, we have kids giving it 2,000% to make it through the school day, and they're just totally spent. And as soon as they hit the door and they're in a safe environment, then all hell breaks loose. And they just explode with all the stress and tension and frustration and pain, rejection, and everything else. And then the administrators and school personnel are like, or the therapists, we don't see your child that way. You must be crazy. I know several people who have been informally labeled, and I say it that way because they've never been the identified patient to have undergone an assessment, but they've been informally labeled. And it's funny how, even though it's informally, it follows them around, forever tied to them in their children's records. But they've been labeled with factitious disorder. And systems of care will use that to deny services, which means that extra heavy burden upon the parents continues lifelong, when it just doesn't need to be like that if we have the awareness.
Right. With the parents and caregivers become very isolated. And as they try to bring awareness to something that people don't understand. And so it's been a real challenge to try to educate people in the schools, and especially during the time that I was raising my kids, the last, 15 years, 20 years, with that challenge ahead of us. So exactly what you're saying.
So those kids who were late teens, early 20s in the book are now in their 30s. You're still involved, right? Because parenting never ends, even with neurotypical kids. A parent is always a parent. The roles are a little bit different, but that love and concern remains, right?
Right. Plus, they're making adult decisions, and they do not have the adult understanding of what they're supposed to do. So even though they're polite and certain abilities they've learned, but there are still judgment issues and a lack of understanding. So actually the challenges become harder as they grow into adulthood. I do see some relief, but the specific experiences they may encounter are larger You know, little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems. So those can be larger, and the consequences are far greater as they're adults if they have a hiccup in their judgment, far greater. There's where the problem arises. And there's where the criminal justice system, a lot of these kids end up in jail or on the street or using because they're trying to self-medicate their anxiety. And the digital world has, to me, has impacted in a very negative way for so-called possibly assisting our kids. It's not assisting. They are not using it in that way.
I think I only asked half the question. Now I can't think of the rest of it. I mean, we're at what, 15 years later? 10 15 years later?
10, yeah. I would say we're on 10 years later, roughly.
Yeah. What, was there anything from the era in their lives that you wrote about in the book that continues to be useful to you as you parent them now at this older place, at this older phase of life?
You know, I'm going to modify that. The parenting isn't there, but it's the guidance. If they ask me, because they have a mind of their own. What I'm hoping is the things that I taught them through their childhood and teenage years, that it becomes habit. So I've always tried to create a habit in them. You know, your socks go in the socks drawer and your shorts go in your short drawer. You don't mix them up. You don't put them in the refrigerator. You know, you create habits that they don't have to think about. So I'm hoping as in their adult years, that they are remembering part of the habit forming of good, healthy living. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. So, but what I do make sure that I've continued to let them know is that I love them. I'm here for them. Exercise is hugely important to reduce anxiety. And stress. Stress. It's huge to release and the stress and anxiety. Exercise, eating healthy, not having energy drinks. But there's only so much. Once they're out of your home and they're of the adult age, it's very difficult. A sense of family is important. The COVID kind of messed a lot of stuff up with nation. But you know, they know where I come from, and they know my candidness, and they know I'm there to support and love them. So, and by now they're trusting that even if you say something to them that they don't want to hear, that it is meant with the best of intentions. And really, that's all any parent can hope for. And I will say, I love you so much. I will tell you whatever. I said, I will say, remember, I love you so much. I will tell you what others will not tell you. They're not invested in you. So if you're about to go down the wrong path, someone else may not, and they'll go, oh, okay. And I'll tell you what, they're on social media. Social media is not going to tell you, you really shouldn't do that. Social media is going to confirm what you're doing, and they're not going to say that's not a good idea. Social media is like, yes, swallow the laundry. Do it. Get on. I don't have a social media account. I don't have a website. I don't have any of that. And, you know, and they know that, but it's not going, I know enough about it. You know, my background was in pretty much technology. But I hopefully and prayerfully will continue to let my kids know I'm there. I love them. I support them, and I'm here to give them whatever guidance they need. So, and actually one of them calls me an awful lot now, and I'm trying to steer him in the right direction as he's going through some heavy duty challenges. But they're naive, and they can be very naive and vulnerable to outside influence. Now, I had, you know, I said a few minutes ago that I recommend your book often. One of my dear friends in the community, well, the one who painted my book cover, she has 3 kiddos, and
they are like, one's mid-teen and two are early teens. And, you know, those transition years are right around the corner. And by the time, you know, seemingly by the time you count to 30, they're going to be here. Because time has been marching so fast lately. And her concern as she read your book, I mean, she was riveted. She does not have time to sit down and digest a book, but she did yours. She's like, how can parents adequately put structures in place to minimize the kinds of risks that your children faced, to minimize the situation that you faced where all of a sudden they were gone. They were out of your protective circle. They were out there being taken advantage of. You know, what practical steps can you recommend?
Okay. Back when I was raising my kids, the internet and screen time was just starting to surface. So parents right now, I don't know how they're doing it. If I was raising teenagers, you know, young adolescents right now, it would be extremely difficult. Two things go on here. Screen time was becoming more popular in the schools with everything on the internet. And kids can figure out things that people didn't think they could figure out. So part of the problem with my children were the parent controls weren't as, there weren't the boundaries that should have been on them because they weren't available. So two things here. Screen time is, I call it a digital devil. So right now, people who have kids and they're in school, the kids are all over the internet. The internet's overstimulating. It causes the brain to be exhausted. So that's one thing with it. The second thing is the influence they're going to get on it when they're not doing schoolwork. And smart TVs, everything else. These kids can get on this stuff, and parents keep trying to one-up them with protective factors, and they're having a hard time doing it. Regular, you know, all people.
And I don't know about you, but the older I get, the harder it is for me to keep up with all the changes.
It is hard, but also it's overstimulating for the brain. It exhausts the brain. Anybody who has a TBI or a concussion, they say stay off the screen time because it truly impacts the brain. So our kids already have like a TBI, you know, traumatic brain injury. It varies to, you know, it varies. It can be very small or it can be larger, but our kids are exhausted. So when they're on the computer all the time at school or whatever, at home or during the COVID, their brains are tired. So one thing I would say is limit screen time. And that's a protective factor because the more their brain is healthy and rested, the less they should be having this temper tantrums. Now, if they're on screen time a lot and you take it away, they're going to have a temper tantrum because now they're addicted to it. So it's very, very addictive. Again, it was just surfacing when my kids were in school, and there was a problem we noticed at the high school. You know, there used to be people prided themselves on having all this technology. Now schools are actually priding themselves on not having it because they realize the harm it's doing. They realize the harm it is doing. You know, without the boundaries that are needed. So with that said, my kids are raised in a little bit of a different time when all this was surfacing so quickly. I think 40 years ago when we didn't have all of this, it was much better, I believe, for those who were impacted because they weren't exhausted by all the technology and also easily influenced. My kids were connected to the other side, I have to say. You know, you wouldn't let your kids hang around in a car with a bunch of hoodlums. Well, now they have complete access to all the hoodlums online. Not to say everybody's a hoodlum, but you just don't know. You don't have the protective factors there. So to the person that was asking the question, your friend, I would say you've got to be careful with the screen time, and that's a protective factor. I would say also, if you live in a small community, make sure that if you think there are issues going on at home that your kids are having difficulty with, and you think it's going to lead them to being on the street, and you live in a small town, contact your officials. Contact someone who's an official in the police department or in the service-oriented field in your community. Contact your church and let your school know, if there are potential issues, because sometimes that can be turned around on parents. Yeah. And parents get the brunt of the problem, and we can't protect our children.
Yeah, that brings up a very good point. I interviewed David Bolding. I don't know if you may know who he is. He's an attorney in the FASD space. So he does a lot of, he's Canadian, and he does a lot of speeches all over the world, really, about FASD and criminology, right? And how to how to defend people, how to represent them, that a huge causation of the trouble they got themselves into had to do with brain injury, right? I'm probably saying that a bit awkwardly, but one of his tidbits of advice is to go interact with the police in your town, the attorneys in your town, the judges in your town, and give them information about FASD. On his website, there's things you can print out from his and say, here you go.
Right.
Along with a listing of your child's particular quirks, what their particular challenges are, and why you believe they could currently be at risk, for the wrong population, or the wrong influences rather, but also a photo.
Yeah.
So that if they are swept up into a gang or something, if that gang gets swept up by the police,
right,
they'll see that photo and say, we need to treat this one just a little bit differently.
Right. They, they can't help if they don't know.
Right.
And then they're getting an education on FASD, and when my daughter was in jail and she was released from jail, the probation officer was handed all this information from that at the time SAMHSA had the FASD Center of Excellence, and then it was dismantled years later. But I had this information because it was credible, and the head of probation at the court that day with all these other people said, this is like a lot of kids that are in jail are getting out. My daughter was vulnerable. She was not it was a nonviolent felony, and she was not the lead. She was vulnerable. And then she wouldn't say who the head honcho was in it all, which is another, very vulnerable, very naive. And
that's the loyalty bit that we tend to have, right?
And she didn't realize what it would do to her. But during that time, and just to piggyback what you're saying and what I was saying about the police, during that time, I went to my local police department, and they had a training for, I don't know if they call it it's a training for what the police do. And it was a 6 weeks course. Mm-hmm. And actually the woman in the book who was with me during most of my little adventures, she and I took this course together, and it was 6 weeks, and they had no idea what FASD was. And during some of their teachings about what they run into, I of course raised my hand and said, well, I bet they blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And was the guy's, parent, an alcoholic? He goes, how do you know this? And I'm like, we need to have a talk. But I wanted to find out what their environment was in the police department, so I could learn something about it, and I could hopefully educate them a little bit. Yeah. But also I wanted to let them know what they were looking at. So
because that relationship.
That's what I did in my spare time in the summer. Courses, So
most people want to go to the beach. Melissa goes to the PD.
Doing a what is it? A drive along or whatever. You get in the car and you drive with them.
Yeah. And but that relationship, those relationships you formed with them.
Yes, and I wanted to learn
you
from
to get
them.
your foot in the door and teach them.
Yep. And I wanted to learn from them about how they address and the I guess the drive along I did. I saw how they address people, and I wanted to learn what they did, and I wanted to learn how I could serve my daughter better, and those who are impacted, because they vulnerably, naively get into this, can get into this. Not all of them do, of course, but when they reach that age, and especially with the exposure of the internet, it becomes high risk behavior.
Yeah.
It just does.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you see yourself writing a sequel at all?
You know, my mother said to me, I see 3 books. This is the first one. And then she passed away. And I just keep going, Mom, I don't know. That's to be.
Did she clue you in on the subjects of the other 2?
Well, the second one, I already know the beginning and an end because I've already lived through it all. But gotcha. I am so focused in on getting the FASD Respect Act passed as an advocate that I have put anything else on hold. I'm there for my kids, and I will always be there for them because they're my life and all those who are impacted. But to me, the FASD Respect Act has to pass.
Yes.
And parents are the advocates. And so my goal and my focus is to do whatever I can to get endorsements and to get co-sponsors from our states. So
here we have another call to action that, that hopefully I'll remember to list it out in the show notes for people to go to FASDUnited.org,
yes.
get their senators and their representative identified, write them, ask for meetings. The good folk at FASD United will participate in those Zoom meetings so that
they will guide you. I've been doing this for 3 years. They will guide you, and it's not difficult. It is necessary. So that's what has to be done. This has to pass.
So we missed by 1 senator last time.
Yeah.
But as crushed as that initial reaction felt,
right.
I say we, not that I'm actively doing anything in this work, but I'm definitely
we're on this podcast. Every ounce of this is advocacy, Patty.
No, I meant in terms of actively working on getting that bill passed, right?
Right.
We came back better with a better bill, more organized, with a lot of the groundwork already laid and built upon. But each session, congressional session, is 2 years, and we are halfway through. So we have 2024 to get this passed. I know your book is part of FASD United, on their website, you can order it that way. Are you involved directly with FASD United in other ways? Are you on the board? Are you?
Yeah, I'm in their Justice Task Force.
Okay.
With other FASD groups, been a parent advocate for FASD United since they were no FAS in the state of Georgia. So I am very active with getting endorsements, not just in the state of Georgia, but in surrounding states and other states. In fact, in Illinois, I just was in touch this morning before my power went out. And luckily it came back on for this.
I think that's a God thing.
Yeah, there's that article by Peter Chen, I believe it's Chen, in NIH PubMed that I just found yesterday. And he talks about Dr. Carl Bell and Dr. Carl Bell's advocacy on FASD. And so I reached over the Georgia state line to get other endorsements. The article is fabulous. He wrote it, and it was published in 2021 by PubMed and in NIH. And again, he knew Dr. Carl Bell and Dr. Bell's advocacy work. So I really, wherever the opportunity is that I walk into, and I will say this again, through God's hand, I will open up that window and that door, and I will walk through it, and I will listen to what I'm supposed to do. And I believe the FASD Respect Act is our golden ticket.
Yeah.
I do. So yes.
I've been telling myself I've been waiting for the former House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, to just kind of, now that his role has changed, just let all the kerfuffle die down.
Yeah.
And maybe he'll have time to meet with me now.
Yeah. I think when you can see a little opening in that door or window, you got to go through it.
Yeah.
My book is in the hands of some of Congress. I personally send this book out to people in my state and other states in Congress that and others who I think could help progress this. To give them a real life experience.
Idea. Yeah, I think that's a tremendous idea. I think I'll get another copy of your book and then also a copy of mine.
Yes.
And ask for a meeting during the Christmas recess.
Yeah. Yeah. You've been on a lot of Zoom. I've been on a lot of Zoom meetings with FASD United. And let me tell you, they walk you through it. They hold your hand. They're amazing.
Well, his Bakersfield office is only like 2 miles from my office at the foster care agency.
Yeah.
So I think I will just show up there sometime.
I think that's great. And, you know, people think they only can talk to their 2 senators and whoever their House member is in their district. Oh, no. I've gone to just about every district in the state of Georgia. You know, there's 16 of them in Georgia. I'm going after them in a very gentle, careful way and a respectful way, because I respect, this is bipartisan. Yeah. You know, totally. I'm not political. I respect what people are trying to do and are civil servants that are there to help. Yeah. And
I mean, we have more than 2 parties, but it's a 2-party system. We all have the same goal, to make life better.
Right.
But each party, you know, whether it's 2 or, you know, however many you want to count, each party just has different ideas about how to get there. Yeah. Yeah. But it's the same goal, to make
we just need better. We need to blend it all, and we need to find the commonality of it. Yeah. I believe we can do this. You just have to navigate it in a way to speak to the audience that you're speaking to in the way that they communicate. And I think it's working. But for all your viewers and listeners, FASD United has a great, their program of doing this is excellent. Yeah. And when people wonder, well, what can we do for our kids? This is what you can do for your kids. We've got to get this thing passed. Yeah. We've got to get it passed. And it's the FASD Respect Act. Get on FASD United's website. And, you know, you can easily walk through their website on how this is done. And if you have difficulty, call them and they'll walk you right through it.
Yeah. You know, I'm thinking of all the ways that a book like yours, you know, The Accomplice, could be utilized. Just, you know, not just giving it to congressmen and senators to give them a firsthand look, but as our youth are transitioning, you know, as they get to high school, the expectations are raised quite a bit. You know, for those that choose to go to college, the expectations are exponentially up there again. But with the dysmaturity, you know, there's not enough structure. So I'm thinking it might be a great idea for all the parents out there to give a copy of the book to, you know, their teachers, their professors, their guidance counselors. You know, a lot of us already do that with trying differently rather than harder.
Well, I think, Patty, what it also tells people, and this is the book was written really also for the caregivers, so they're not alone, but also it allows these teachers, or, I mean, I've gone to Florida, that's where I'm from. I mean, I live in Georgia. Really, I'm from Georgia, but I grew up in Florida. I've dropped it off at libraries. I've talked to the head of the libraries, dropped it off. I was down in Florida dropping it off at their house members down there. But I think the book allows, you know, sometimes, and for me, when I was raising my kids and I was at the schools, I was writing my own IEPs for my kids because no one ever heard of FASD. And I would have the sample literature. So I had some credibility. This should give them credibility, because people used to look at me like, oh my gosh, you know, you don't know what you're talking about. And then they'd find out I did know what I was talking about, and I did have my kids' best interests at heart. So this also provides some credibility. Again, the praise for the book, there's some incredible people. The foreword written by Larry Bird and Billy Edwards. I always say that my book is just an intro to their foreword. Their foreword's unbelievable. And that in itself will tell the educational institutions, the colleges, it will in itself, that foreword will speak volumes to them. And then they can read the experience of the story. The praise for the book that has Dr. Waite, and others in it, will speak volumes to these people without even reading the story.
I got Ken Jones.
Unbelievable.
He was the first one that in my praise section.
It's Nally Novick Brown, Tom Donaldson, Stephen Greenspan, that in itself. And the foreword will speak volumes so that these parents who are trying to help their kids have the credentials behind them with, this is not, I'm not making this up, and they will be looked at as competent parents.
Yeah. Oh, that is priceless. When teachers or other professionals, no matter what system of care they're in, sees that a parent is in alignment with the people who have, championed your book. That does put that parent in it casts a different light upon that parent.
Yes, it does.
And makes it far less likely that they also would be labeled with factitious disorder.
Right.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, we've been going on for about an hour at this point, and I think the wait was well worth it to the audience. Melissa and I have been trying to coordinate our schedules for 5 months?
Yeah, a long time. I think even longer. I don't know. It's when we were first in contact. It's been quite a while. So just appreciate it so much that you're.
I started out with Dr. Catherine Page, and we both listed out all the people that we would fantasize about talking with. You were on my list.
Well, I appreciate it.
June.
You are a force, just as a person of compassion and education, and a force for those who are impacted by FASD and the caregivers. And again, your story. And I am in this to learn more about the FASD community and what I can do. And again, as I said, I'm an advocate first. I'm just an author on the side because it was what I needed to do.
Yeah. Well, you said something a little while back. When you were interacting with, taking that 6-week class, and you'd pop your hand up and say, "Oh, was his parents doing blah, blah, blah?"
Yeah.
Right? Because of your familiarity with all the social aspects of, in the environment, you had the knowledge to ask those questions, to be insatiably curious about what's going on for that person. Whereas most people, if they're doing the work of social workers, of police, of probation, there's no time for that.
Right.
But we cannot let go of insatiable curiosity, because when we do, we will miss critical pieces that would change the direction of our work.
Well, there was no doubt in my mind that the case study that they were working on, this man who they were doing a case study on, absolutely was impacted by FASD. And he tried so badly to get help and never got the help he needed. And this was what this was all about. So when I asked those questions and they said, "How did you know?" I'm like, "Well, let me tell you something here." So it's just so important to bring up this information to even your local police department when you're trying to help your child, or the possibility of what could happen. That it's all about prevention. This is all about prevention and also intervening. I did want to mention the Riverside, University of California Riverside study on the paternal contribution of prenatal alcohol. And that was something I think you and I had talked about, but the University of California Riverside did a study in 2020. It was published, and it talked about the father's unintentional prenatal alcohol exposure to the child prenatally. And another study just came out recently
through the genetic and the epigenetic changes.
Well, and the alcohol actually, and also one just came out from Texas A&M on November 15, 2023. It was published that basically is similar, very similar to if a father's drinking pre-conception or during conception, what the alcohol can do. And the Riverside, California study that came out in I think it was 2020. Yes, I didn't mention any of that in my book, because my book is a story in advocacy and experience, not on the research. But that study was pretty incredible on the unintentional exposure to alcohol through the father's drinking.
Yeah.
And that's really important, because in that study, it showed all male offspring were impacted.
Wow.
So, I know diet has a lot to do with it, with the choline, and Dr. Carl Bell made mention of choline in his book. The more choline, the more it dissipates the alcohol. So these are two more studies that are coming out. So there's a lot more that's coming out, but it just shows how widespread FASD is. And it's we need to get this legislation passed.
Yeah, so often the awareness of it is limited to the facial structural changes, right? And people just not realizing that FASD is so much bigger than that, right? It's proverbial tip of the iceberg.
Right.
And the awareness here again of paternal use, there's a whole nother layer of that iceberg.
Yeah. And the neurobehavioral disorder. It's the facial features is a very small percentage FAS. We've got the neurobehavioral disorder from prenatal exposure. That's key here.
Oh, this has been a delightful hour. I'd love to have you back again.
I'd love to come back, and
let's not wait 5 more months.
No, I know. I really appreciate your advocacy, and earlier when you said, well, I'm not actively involved. Oh yeah, you are, because this is going to spread this information to everybody to get this, get people to advocate for the FASD Respect Act and help, which will help their children and help their adults and help, their adult children, as I said, and those who are impacted. 1 in 20. Yeah.
1 in 20. And
I think, and I think the number is greater than that.
Well, you were up at the Impact Week, National Impact Week, were you not?
No, I wasn't.
Oh, you didn't go?
No, okay. I had mono.
Oh, that's right. You were still recovering. Yeah, I didn't go either. I mean, as long as I'm caring for my mom, I'm not going anywhere.
I wasn't able to go.
Yeah, but I guess Dr. Phil May had updated his stats, but he has not published them yet.
Oh.
He changed it to 6.7% from 5.
Yeah, I believe it.
So when I crunch that number, that's 1 in 15.
Yep. Yeah. Well, Dr. Bell had mentioned about the opioid addiction, and he had verbally talked to me about it. The late Dr. Carl Bell and the addiction. And so this touches a lot of areas of the challenges we're having right now. So we absolutely need to take care of this.
Yeah. I had a friend working for one of the larger recovery programs in our town, and she's one of the people that proofread my book. And she's like, oh, I'm gonna get you in, where she was working, and she had just gotten that job, and the director was like, oh, that sounds fascinating, but then he never returned my emails.
Yeah.
And when I followed up with her on that, she said, honestly, all they care about right now is the fentanyl crisis.
Yeah.
And which is understandable. It commands attention because it is so immediately fatal.
Right.
But the insidious damage that alcohol does.
Right. And a
is,
lot
I
of,
think, the biggest toll in our society.
right. And a lot of the addiction and the self-medication for the anxiety, a lot of this can stem from alcohol exposure.
Yeah, totally.
So,
well, Melissa, thank you for making the time. I know you are an incredibly busy woman. Doing everything that you are for, getting FASD Respect Act. And I'm so glad that we worked that call to action into this episode. Everybody, whether you're listening or watching, thank you for tuning in this week to Living with FASD. I hope you'll come back next week again. Next week's episode is going to be that attorney that I mentioned, David Bolding. And that's one heck of a lively discussion. You're not going to want to miss it, particularly if you want to put into place those protective factors with the legal system. For he would say as the eventuality, but speaking for myself, I've not been part of that system, so it's not necessarily an eventuality. It probably is if the FASD continues to be unrecognized. But if you know about it, you can take these steps, and he gives a lot of nitty-gritty suggestions to that. So tune in next time. In the meantime, come back Friday for another Free Friday tidbit. So it's Melissa, I've been doing on my YouTube channel Free Friday tidbits, just 5-10 minute teachings all year long on another aspect of the neurobehavioral model. And I think I'm going to be revamping it for 2024. So it won't be just off the cuff me talking about a characteristic. So we'll see. I'm a great idea person. Let's see if I can.
This has been wonderful. And don't sell yourself short. It's incredible what you're offering. And I'm very thankful to be on your podcast to contribute.
Yeah, it was a delightful conversation and a terrific start to my day. I'm going to have to take off the podcaster hat and put the social work hat on and get out the door.
Right.
But thank you, everyone, for tuning in. If you want to be part of the community, hop on over to Facebook and join in the group tab. Search out Living with FASD podcast. We'll be glad to see you on the inside there. You can interact with people. You can make suggestions for future topics or any particular guests that you want me to invite on. Let me know there. That's a good space for that. If you're not a Facebook kind of person, such as Melissa, then you can email me at livingwithfasdpodcast@gmail.com, and I'll be glad to hear from you over there. And yeah, just please keep liking, sharing, spreading the love, right?
Yes.
And let's get the website, the podcast, let's just get it out there. And this may air Christmas Day, it may air right after the holidays. It depends on if I give myself any time off. But Christmas and Hanukkah and Kwanzaa, they're all right around the corner. And so is New Year's. So if you have missed a gift, you can, Melissa, hold yours up. Here's a couple really good books for you to consider getting for people. So thank you again, Melissa. It's been a great pleasure. Everybody, I'll see you next week. Take good care.